There's a great movie. I think it's a great movie. It's called Good Will Hunting. You may remember if you've seen it. Matt Damon plays the character of a boy genius, someone with tremendous intellectual and mathematical abilities, but who gets into a lot of trouble. And he has assigned to him a therapist, Robin Williams' character, to help him stay out of jail and help him hopefully to move forward with his life. As part of the relationship, Matt Damon's character sort of wounds Robin Williams, and they end up sitting by the shore of the Charles River. And Robin Williams turns to Matt Damon and he says, and I'm just doing this from memory, he says something like, I let you hurt me. I thought that you could hurt me. I thought that you were a big deal, but then I realized you're just a kid. And I realized that, yes, you can quote all of Shakespeare's sonnets. You can recite to me the great love poetry, but you don't know anything about love because you haven't taken the risk of loving someone. That there's a difference between the kind of knowledge that you have and gain by thinking and reading and the kind of knowledge that can only be gained by doing. And that kind of knowledge that can only be gained by doing is, I think, at the core of what it means to receive Torah. Before we study Torah, we say a blessing, Asher kichanu b'mitzvotav v'tivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah, and the purpose of that blessing, I think, is to help us to step over a threshold. That if we are used to studying things, analyzing them, understanding them, but seeing them with our minds, the purpose of the bracha is to remind ourselves that when we study Torah, our task is not merely to understand, but to allow ourselves the possibility that in the course of studying Torah, that something is being spoken to us. To open up our hearts to the divine. And the story of Revelation is grounded in a phrase that, according to the Talmud, the Jewish people somehow stole or found out from the angels. Na'aseh v'nishma. Let us do, and then let us hear and understand. In the Talmud, Rabbi Elazar said, when the Jewish people said, we will do before we will understand, before we will hear, a divine voice emerged and said to them, who revealed to my children this secret that the ministering angels use? Because the angels at first they fulfill, and then only afterward do they understand. In an essay by Emmanuel Levinas, he describes this difference in the ways of knowing as something called the temptation of temptation. He says, the first way of knowing, where you keep things at arm's length, he says, is the temptation of temptation is not pleasure, but the you're not tempted by pleasure, but by the ambiguity of the situation in which pleasure is still possible, but in respect to which the ego keeps its liberty and has not given up security, has kept its distance. In other words, the temptation of temptation is not, oh, I want to eat that piece of food. It is the temptation of knowing that there's something there that's important, but my ego is going to keep its liberty. I'm not going to give up on my security. I'm going to keep my distance. And what he's saying is that if you want to do this thing called receiving Torah, your ego can't keep its liberty. You can't keep your distance. You have to risk being vulnerable. And the Talmud in that same passage said something quite strange, that at the moment when the Jewish people received the Torah, we were standing bitachtit ahar, which the rabbis read not as the foot at the mountain, but underneath the mountain. And they show you this crazy idea that God lifted up the mountain and said, if you want to receive Torah, great. But if not, I'm going to drop this on your heads and you're going to be buried here. And what's interesting about that image, according to Levinas, is, and what that image is conveying, is that the choice of receiving Torah in the end is actually a choice between life and death. That, and he goes on to say, if you do not accept the Torah, you will not receive this, you will not leave this place of desolation and death, this desert which lays waste all the splendors of the earth. To receive Torah is to make a decision to live again. It's to make a decision to risk loving again. It's to make a decision to risk being vulnerable. And so, as we remember those who have died, we grieve. We feel the absence of their lives in our lives. We wish that we could have had more time. And we don't honor them by withdrawing from the world. We don't honor them by hardening our hearts. We don't honor them by staying safe. We honor them by making a decision to live again, to risk, to love, to open ourselves up, to do, even though it makes no rational sense at all. To do and then to hear. It is the secret of the angels. It is our secret as well. Please rise.